Right, you're gonna start.
Good morning, everybody. It's July 16th at 9:02 a.m. and thank you all for attending the third Benefits Committee meeting for 2021. We have quite the agenda today, and our goal today too is to vote on the renewal. So keep that in mind while you're listening to Sean's presentation and all the good stuff he has to tell us today. So, Sean, take it away.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Happy Friday. Hopefully. There's a lot of silence there. I'm a little worried. Well, thank you all for being here. As Jill said, we have what looks like a long agenda, but I think it actually will potentially go pretty quick today. So thank you, everybody, for being here. So what we're going to do, I don't know if anybody had any questions, comments, concerns before we dive in. Looks like everybody's good to start. So we're going to talk about kind of two things in the beginning. We're going to talk about the claims experience, and also, if you all remember, one of the discussions we had at the last meeting was talking about kind of the city's reserves on the self-funded plan. So Jay will probably help me with some of that. Jay was able to put together kind of a history, and Jay, correct me if I mess any of this up. The city ultimately has a self-insurance fund that also includes other coverages beyond just medical for other risks that the city takes on in that regard. But Jay was able to kind of isolate the health numbers through that. So we're going to talk about that. In going through that process, it was actually good in a lot of ways. We did notice going back in some of the years a little bit of a discrepancy between what we were showing on our spreadsheets and what the city had accounted for in that. As we dove into that, we isolated it to kind of the way employees when two employees both work here and have the family coverage, the way those were being calculated for. So our claim spreadsheet that you're going to see is actually adjusted a little bit. It's going to look a little bit worse because some of those employees were kind of being captured twice in the funding. That's sort of the downside in that, but the good news is overall the fund, that was only a couple years in the years of history, so overall the fund is still performing well, and we'll talk about some of that in the discussions that we had with that. It's actually good now that we've kind of done that. We have a way to do also a double check kind of at the end of the year to look at that. So we'll talk about claims. We'll talk about some of that reserve history. As you guys know, ours is obviously an estimate. Jay's is the one that really counts. So we'll take a look at those numbers as well, because that's based on what the city's actual bills have been paid. So if you guys want to flip to page 2. Sorry, there's no page numbers, but to the claims report. So this will look a little, claims will look a little bit higher in terms of reserve accumulation, or it look like there's a little bit more deficit than what you saw last month. That's because some of those dual employees were being counted twice in our system. So if you take a look, and I think everybody's pretty familiar with the report. If you guys want to go, we do have May claims. So if you take a look and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns over, actual paid claims for the month of May, you'll see we're down a little bit from the prior month and the 2 months before that, coming in at about 1.7 million in that regard. So overall, if we take a look at the plan for the current year, and you go to the gold and we go to reserve account, so that's basically whether or not we have a surplus or deficit in the plan. We are positive this year by $311,000. Our claims per employee per month is $982 per employee per month. So last year, that totaled out at $877. So if you want to go to the kind of little summary box on the bottom right, overall our claims per employee per year are up about 12%. That's driven by a couple things. We talked about it a little bit in the last meeting, but a big part of that is last year was an anomaly because we had 2 to 3 months where claims were reduced substantially. So 12% sounds bad, but remember we're comparing it to a really low benchmark. Historically, when you look at that, it's not that big of an increase. It's just looking at last year as kind of a skewed year makes that look a little bit bigger. A big part of what is driving that, though, kind of to the middle box, is you've got a number of high claimants this year. So catastrophic, some cancers, heart conditions, different things. That's still a lot of what's driving that increase overall. Last year, it's not that we didn't have those, but especially if you look in, this is kind of globally, not just specific to the city of Clearwater, we saw lower than normal cancer claims last year across the board, but that's not necessarily a good thing because a lot of people weren't going for those tests during COVID. So they weren't having their mammogram, they weren't having their colonoscopy. So part of what we're seeing kind of more globally, probably at the city of Clearwater as well, but there's no way to know looking at just a piece of data whether or not this was the case, but there's probably some catch up from the fact that some of that was delayed last year. So that's a big part of what's driving that. So does anybody have any questions on that? If you guys, I went through the claims quickly. I know some of you guys maybe, have you guys been here before, or do you want me? Okay, I was just making sure. I didn't know if anybody wants me to go through it in any more detail, or if you guys just want to get to the good part. Good part. Okay, so if you guys want to go back, it's going to be about 4 pages, and it looks like pages that looks like this with a table. There's just some data on prior year's claims, before that high claim, in the graph. But if you want to go to this chart here, so I'll give you guys the short version of this. But basically, what we did in this is going back to when the self-funded plan started. Jay and his team put together essentially year by year, line by line of how the fund is performed. And one thing I will point out, so this is part of how we figured out the part with the dual spouses. The other thing is there are going to be sometimes timing issues based on when something gets credited. So, in looking at one of our reports, the pharmacy rebates we showed in 1 year, but the city's accounting showed it in another year because when it was actually applied. So I tell you all that because if you're going to go try and compare one to another, you might run yourself a little crazy. But if you go to the bottom right, to the annual net reserve, so the city overall, since going self-funded, there's been about 2.8 million kind of in surplus that's been generated. And Steve, I know you had kind of asked a follow-up question on some of those numbers, what was that? So that's ultimately based on the city's record keeping, all the expenses, revenue, pharmacy rebates, all those items. There's a positive balance, about 2.8 million, so just shy of 3 million. I know, Steve. Okay, so if you flip to the next page, you all remember from our last meeting, we were looking at about a 5.3% increase. And let me just, because I did identify that one issue with the dual spouses. So a logical question would be, well, if the funding was potentially lower, does that impact the amount of increase? And the way the projection works, the good news is those people were being counted for higher claims, right, that don't exist, and the higher funding. So essentially they wash each other out. So there's no change to the 5.3% as a result.
So I have a question on this dual funding. So we're saying that in the calculations, the city wasn't saying that they were funding Because the city pays 100% of the dual employees in their family.
Yep.
Okay, the city pays 100% of that. But you're saying the city wasn't counting for one of the employees' funding, or?
No, so
This
there's actually only one set of funding.
Okay.
Because if myself and my spouse work at the city of Clearwater, and obviously if we both take single plans, we're just single, right? We're counted twice. But if we go onto a family plan, like I'm counted as a primary, let's say I'm the subscriber and my spouse is just a spouse. But the way the reporting system captures them is kind of in a unique bucket, right? So what that was doing was it was telling our system that it was 2 families instead of it should have been 1.
It was just in their numbers.
It was
It
just,
wasn't anything the city.
So what was the difference in monthly costs approximately between what your numbers coming up with, what their numbers, what
100,000
yeah, I think
per
it was
year?
about 80
per month.
per month.
So you're
80,000 per month.
So you're saying it was actually costing us 80,000 less or more per month for the city-wise?
80,000 less than what was on the spreadsheet.
So the city was saying that this was the funding here, but it was really 80,000 less in the funding.
Our claim spreadsheet was.
Your claim
Not the
spreadsheet was
city.
off 80,000.
Correct.
Okay,
Because those people were being counted twice.
In their
But in
recap,
the,
or their estimate
yeah.
of the numbers.
So just so you know though, because that system also feeds the projection, that employee that the funding wasn't being counted, or that was being counted for, there was also assigning a claims average to them.
The city's numbers come right from payroll, and the payroll was.
so that was approximately $10,000 per month,
80,000 a month.
80,000 a month, so that's, okay.
But basically it's a net impact.
Okay, so it's a net impact because,
What's that?
why is it a net impact?
Because when there was a projection, that projection is based on that same count.
Mhm.
So it says, okay, assume 10,000 claims per employee per month. Maybe. So if there was one person, let's make it simple, it was assuming funding, but it was also assuming they had claims. So you take the claims out and you take the funding out, and it's a wash.
What he's basically saying is it didn't impact their calculation of the required contribution, whether that was a 3% increase or a 5% increase or a 7% increase. It was a wash there. Where it flushed out was when they tried to calculate what this number was,
Mhm.
they were coming up with a larger number because of that error in their numbers that needed to be corrected. So it flushed out that theirs wasn't truing up to the actual. And that's when we found it, corrected it.
So how many families was there? Because 80,000,
There's 40.
40?
There's 40, and it was being counted as 80. And that's because, just so you know, you have the 3 tiers, right? Employee,
Right.
employee plus 1, employee plus family. Well, the system, we have to have a special tier
Mhm.
for the spouse. That, the one that's an employee that enrolls as the spouse, and that was coming out in the reporting.
So the city would normally do $750 per employee if there's employee only. But you're only counting it as 750 total-ish employee.
Now, if you look at this page, Steve, you can see that would be an easier way to show it. So I rounded to 80, it's 38, so 76. The city, for somebody in that tier, kicks in 21.22 per month. So as we looked at,
So the employer contribution should be 2122 and for the dual spouse. And previously we were adding it as, what was our previous number we had it as? That the city was paying for it?
You were
1,000?
showing it as 42.
essentially,
You were showing it as double
was
that.
the same number, but saying there were 76.
Which
the
effectively,
employee and the spouse.
Which
Oh,
effectively
I got you. So where it was saying that there's 78 people, they were only saying,
Yeah, it was saying there were 76 and there's actually only 30.
right. So for the numbers, that was saying that, but because there weren't that actual many employees, was the city still putting that much money into it? For basic?
No, we were putting the 38. at
You're putting the
21,
38.
Yep.
And for calculation purposes, you were saying that the city was funding,
Yes, now, and Jay, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in some of the early years, because when we looked at the discrepancies, in some early years, there was no discrepancy. The funding was almost, so we're not exactly sure if someone,
There was a change made at some point in
Yeah.
time. Yeah, the city may have been over contributing up to a point in time.
do we know at what point in time it changed?
We think somewhere 17, 18.
So around 17 or 18, approximately the time that we changed our deductibles down to 2040, our co-pays down to 2040, and we had showed an increase in our plan costs. That's about the time that it changed. That's
Potentially, I don't remember the timeline, but I don't think it necessarily had anything to do with that.
He's saying it's a wash that he was showing it as an in and an out.
Okay, so let's get to the good news, as you said, Steve. Let's get to where I want to get. So overall, the initial projection called for a 5.3%. As you guys can see, obviously claims are up quite a bit this year. But what we did work and, with the team and look at that 5.3 projected increase as well as that $3 million in surplus, knowing also being cautious where the year is trending, what were we able to do kind of with that surplus? So if you want to flip the page, what we ultimately want to talk about today is the city. We've all looked at basically using that surplus to cut that increase in.
Does the pharmacy rebate, is that figured into your calculations
It is.
on that? So you had said at our last meeting it would be approximately $1 million. You figured that into next year's costs when you did the calculation.
That's figured as an offset to the cost before that bottom line number is created. So what we want to do is obviously counting for inflation, counting for the fact that, employees have contributed and helped build that surplus. We want to use that to offset half of that increase. If claims weren't up 12% per, year over year, it might be a situation where we could say, let's absorb the whole increase, but with the way the plan has trended this year, we don't necessarily know if we're going to eat into that $2.8 million, how much we're going to eat into that before the end of the year. So looking at that, we wanted to take a conservative route, and if this year turns around a little bit, numbers get better, going into next year, that also gives us that flexibility to take more of a multi-year approach. Ideally, you still want to have something if you're ever looking at a 10, 12, 15% increase. You don't want to have spent all that money down absorbing, increases on the lower end, because that's the year where you really want to have as much of that as possible to help the employees with that. But I think this is, ultimately what we're looking at, 2.5% increase. If you look at the fact that last year was a 0, that means we're talking about over 2 years, about a 1.3% average, which is pretty good when it comes to insurance. So I'll kind of open it up there, even though we've been having dialogue, and have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback?
I've made these spreadsheets. Well, let's see here. When we first started getting self-insured, and I remember, Jennifer, I know you weren't here, Jill, you weren't here, Sean was here. There's a bunch of people that weren't here at the time, and it was projected. Sean, you had talked about how most major cities and most major companies went to the self-insured because it helps to save money. Overall, it helps to save money, and we're all like that. And then 2017, we actually saw some good savings. We're actually showing some good rates return and such, and we're like, this, everything's great. That's when we decided to try to figure out a way to give something back to the employees, which were done eventually done in the form of decreasing our co-pays down to 2040 instead of 46. Since then, we've had 1 year, according to my projections that I did, and I used all your numbers on these, that we actually saw a decrease of, I think it was 400,000. Every other year, we actually saw surpluses going into our reserves. So you threw a little bit of a monkey wrench into this one. You said that the city and Sean have completely different numbers in there. I would really like to see the corrected numbers, all corrected numbers from back since we went.
You got that, that's what we went over.
That's the whole numbers there, month per month claims and such, and how the
But
funding.
not month by month.
I mean, the funding. So how the difference is, because it's a difference of 40 employees funding over here, but we're talking $4 million difference in the reserve funds over the 40 employees funding over 5 years. That seems like a lot of difference in reserve funds. So yeah, I brought some sheets to spread out. Obviously, this is going to be a little bit changed now because that's different. I want to pass them out, but this is a trend month to month on based on the numbers that Sean gave us over since 2015, how the reserve has increased each month. First year we didn't have the extra reserve funds when we first started self-funding. So they were showing some decreases in there in the county. Since then, since 2015, every year we showed an increase in funding. The spreadsheet shows some calculations there as to how much overage we should have had added to the reserve each year. Like 2015, according to the numbers we had, there should have been 547,000 extra added to it. 2016 was 1 million, almost 1.4 million added to reserve based on these numbers that we're given. Total plan costs versus total plan funding. Again, almost $1 million in 2017. 2018 was an anomaly. And correct me if I'm wrong, was that the year that we had all the neonates, or the premature births, that we had a lot of stop loss, extra lot? So that was probably the reason that we had a decrease in the yearly reserves for that year. The city paid extra on that year. In 2019, not last year, but 2019, we had almost $2 million extra in reserves every year. 2020, last year, we had $2.2 million in reserves. This year, we know it's going to be a little bit less. But this is a running total, basically, of since every month since 2015, showing at the end of it, at the end of 2020, $6,691,058 in reserve. That's a lot of money in reserve.
Your 2019 and 2020 numbers are significantly different than what we show. So
Is that because of the dual employee?
No.
These are the numbers straight from what Sean has provided us. And
We'll have to look at that to see
Yeah,
what's
just
causing that
remember,
difference.
so
Now,
we get a report when a claim gets paid. The city's reporting is gonna be based on when they fund that, so there may be carryovers between months, right?
Now.
So
It would be that significant.
now the significance on that, Jay, in your calculations, do you have the pharmacy rebates, your calculations of the 760,000?
Yeah, you can see the column.
So I used specifically the numbers that came from Sean's
Just,
calculations.
there's one thing I would say about that number though, so the state has a reserve requirement of 60 days minimum,
Yes.
which for the city right now is gonna be about, let's say 3.5 million.
On the spreadsheet, the last column, I did it through the middle of 2019. That's based on each 20 months prior to it, the average cost per month for the 20 months prior to that date. So like on August of, or let's say December 2019. So it's a cost of $1,613,238. That's 1 month's reserve based on the total plan cost of the previous 20 months average.
Okay, so there's about
So
3.2
it-
million needed for that, and then
Yep.
there's also a requirement with the state for what's called incurred but not reported claims, which is about another $1 million.
But regardless of that, he's calculated 6.5 million or more versus the 2.8 million actual.
Right.
We
and
just gotta
that's-
find what's wrong with the calculation, because the
It
2.8 million
seems-
is what's in the bank.
Okay.
So we can find what's wrong with your spreadsheet, but I think that we will find.
I find
Where
it
the
hard to
differences
believe
are.
that the difference of the funding for the 40 employees counted to
No, it
$4
can't,
million.
it can't. That's why I'm saying your 2019, 2020 numbers,
Mhm.
there's a huge difference between that and our numbers and the Gearing numbers, which agree.
The
So
2019,
we'll get to the bottom of that. We can't do it right
is this
now.
your numbers that you have right here? Oh, I'm sorry, this,
I'm talking about this number.
did you have
This number.
1.2? And,
For 2019, we're showing that 1.9 or almost $2 million overage surplus that you're showing.
mhm.
We're showing 272,000 for that.
There's a big difference in
2020,
there.
we've got 2.2, we have 1.1, so it's double that year.
There's a big difference in there, 'cause according to the
Yeah,
sheets.
exactly, that's why I said, when so before we can get anywhere, we need to resolve that.
Mhm. All right, John.
So I guess I'll open it back up at the 2.6%.
As far as the IFF union goes, we have big number differences over here. I understand that that we're now finding that calculations were not made correctly on our sheets and our stuff. We say it's a wash. We have a big difference in this. I use the actual numbers that we're given at each of our meetings since 2015 on to do monthly projections and showing increases in the reserves over here. I have a big difference. I'm not willing to vote for an increase right now, but we have differences in our calculations on money over here. Yeah, I know we're talking about going from 5.3 down to 2.6, but we want to see actual numbers over here before we go for an increase. We're saying no increase. We're not ready to vote a yes on the increase. Sure. Based on the numbers. That's from the IFL portion.
We would want to see that too.
There's a big discrepancy on here, and like I said, I use listed total plan funding and total plan costs, come up with these on 2019, 2020, plus the pharmacy rebates.
And I understand, Steve, and I understand the frustration. I think it's frustrating for all of us. It's frustrating for us to realize that there was a difference when we look at the history. Candidly, we tried to figure out what changed, and I don't know that we're able to identify that. At some point between 17 and 18, so up to that, the numbers matched
So
identically.
from 17 on, the numbers back, I don't.
I can't remember before 17 or before 18. I have to look. As you know, a lot of the staff was not here at the time, so it's hard to find that history of, whether or not the city chose to overfund that initially and to doubly fund those employees. And so obviously we went through this exercise and we found that there was a discrepancy, and that was the good part of doing that exercise. It was great that the city, I think when it first started, again, that was something that Joe and Alan probably worked on, where maybe they chose to overfund that. But the only thing I would say is, regardless of that, again, there's a discrepancy and it happened. Regardless of that, the numbers that Jay has that we put on that spreadsheet ultimately are not going to change. There's not $3 to $4 million, whatever that number is. If you look at the history of the dual employee tier, it's actually grown in the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, it was only it's somewhere in the 20 person range, low 20s. So more people have enrolled in that. So it's not a dollar for dollar every year was that number. Obviously rates have gone up. Ultimately looking at that though, what you have in front of you is what the numbers are. There's not $4 million that can come back into the bank because of that. So we can get whatever you want or are comfortable with. From a timing point of view, the only thing I would say is there's not $4 million that's just going to appear in that fund tomorrow. So either way, regardless of what we bring you back, I don't believe that there's gonna be a change to the 2.6%, because if you go back to page 1 and you look at the way the plan here is running, you look at some of the catastrophic claims that are on there, we still have to make sure the fund is managed responsibly, which it has been, and it will continue to be. So that's where we're looking at that 2.6% increase. Overall, as you guys know, inflation, there's some reports that just came out, inflation's at 5%. Medical inflation is close to double that. So we're seeing a lot of groups in the 8, 9, 10, 12, 15% increase range. The 2.6% of the city paying 100% of single is still a pretty good increase, no increase last year. So ultimately, we'll bring back whatever you're comfortable with. But I'm giving you kind of the cold hard facts that the numbers are the numbers. Again, I think everybody wishes there wasn't this discrepancy. We don't know. We can't identify why that changed, right? So for a number of years, the numbers matched straight up, and then there was a change. We don't necessarily know what made that or who made that. Neither one was wrong. It's just, it is what it is. And those are the numbers we're looking at. So if you want to delay, have another meeting, at the end of the day, that's something we can do, but I don't believe that the projection is ultimately going to change because of that. We're talking about correcting, an accounting discrepancy at that point. It's not like the employees were overcharged for, or anything along those lines. We're talking about the way, money in that fund was accounted for. And obviously the data that we had, the way it spits into our system was incorrect. That's on us. Unfortunately, we don't go in and check the city's financials, to say, so that's something that, Jay and I have talked about at the end of each year now. We will do that to make sure, but it's not something that can be done on a month-to-month basis either way to go into that fund. There's too many timing discrepancies. The fund also runs on a fiscal year where the plan runs on a calendar year. So there's always going to be some differences there. So I'm telling you that because we will bring back whatever you want, work with the team. But ultimately, those numbers are the numbers. That's what was actually spent in the fund. And, going forward, maybe to make everyone comfortable, we'll put a disclaimer on the bottom of the claims that says, funding is an estimate based on assumed enrollment, subject to final verification at the end of the year. Because that's, when you have two separate systems where we're accounting for that, I don't think there's anything else we can do besides give that disclaimer and make any adjustments at the end of the year. We've identified. This one obviously is a big one, but there could be something in the future too that would create a difference.
Yeah, I want to add to the $80,000 a month calculates to about $1 million a year.
Right.
That problem started with the gearing numbers about 4 years ago.
Okay.
So I think we're gonna be able to show you that's the $4 million difference between your number, which doesn't account for that, and these corrected numbers that now account for it. That's the simple explanation.
Okay. Our members are not happy with the increase. A lot of them gone through a lot of issues with COVID and stuff. And by the way, that was another question we had to ask. Did the city receive any federal money to help supplement insurance claim costs for insurance due to COVID? And if so, was any of it applied towards our insurance resource?
So not from claims costs, so expenses. We received money or reimbursement on expenses related, but not for treatment, you know what I mean? So like we had several that were hospitalized.
Mm-hmm.
We did not get reimbursement for that, but like for medical supplies, for example, at the clinic, the masks, things like that, yes, we did.
Okay. All right, very good. Yeah, I knew we had that. I just never got any of the everything's quiet. I'm looking at my notes. Let's see.
That's right.
Yes. So there's only about 30 or 35 people now in the projected the dual enrollment instead of 75.
Total families.
Total families.
enrollment.
Yeah, there's 30.
The other trend,
As of
just
last
to make note of it, when I was going through my numbers, I noticed an interesting trend in our insurance, and it has to do with retirees. Over the last 5 years, our retirees that are enrolled in our insurance have dropped drastically for the retiree only enrolled in our insurance. It went from around 100 in 2015, now it's down to 50 retiree only. The retiree plus one, retiree plus family stayed the same as 30, with the exception of one family, 30 and 33. Right now, it was 34. So that's some of the issues with some of the money coming in too, is because we don't have retirement money coming in. Yeah, I know they have claims associated with them as well, but they pay 100% of their costs. There's a cost reduction because retirees are finding other plans that are more affordable to them now. Well, it turns out to be. There's starting to be some more plans out there. So that's showing a difference.
And I think to look at that too, you need to look at kind of a list of all those people and see, did they age out or did they,
That's possible, but it's interesting that over the years, you can actually see a slide in the retirees that are actually in on our plan.
Yeah, because they're getting older.
Yeah.
You know, and so Medicare, you're not gonna pay our premiums when you get Medicare. So as our retirees age out, unless people are retiring because of, the average working age is getting older and older, I would expect that trend. That's a normal trend. So our retirees that are there are aging out. We don't have as many new retirees coming in because less people are retiring. So I don't think that's a troublesome trend. I think that's what
No,
we would be
it's just an interesting trend
experiencing.
noticing that I noticed when going through all these numbers and the people that are enrolled in the plan, both retirees and the employees that are enrolled in the plan.
I mean, collectively, we kind of hear that most people nowadays, their primary kind of decision on retiring is waiting
To Medicare age, and
And-
that's,
And I'll add that retirees staying under our insurance aren't really a good thing for the
No.
plan.
it's not something we
They
would
cost,
want to
not-
they cost more than the average.
Yes.
And that's why we have to book an OPEB liability for that, because if we charge them based on what they're costing us, they're a more
Sure.
expensive tier.
Yeah, so they would not
State law doesn't
Sure.
allow us to
contribute
do
to
that.
surplus at all.
No, I understand that.
So then dropping off as a benefit as well.
So basically what we were saying before, when we were talking about a 5.3% increase, is that was to cover approximately $1 million in overage. We're looking at. And by the way, I know that you base it on a lot of our stuff on trends and such, but our city historically has run well underneath these trends, exceedingly underneath these trends, almost flat out on this. So again, we're basing the next year's projections on trends. And even with the increased costs based on the trends over there and our funding, we still have come out ahead each month or each year for our funding. We still have some overages each year adding to our plan and such.
Yeah, no, I would say this year, Steve, that you.
This year's probably gonna be like.
And
difficult.
candidly, the pharmacy rebates are boosting that surplus.
Yes.
If you cut that $1.1 million out, you'd actually be in deficit.
I
And that was, I think, why you asked the question of, is that being calculated?
Yes,
Is
I agree.
because otherwise it would be a lot higher increase
Yes.
if that wasn't.
And something that I just want to add in is, so it's not just trend, it's claims. Okay, and so claims make a big difference. We've got an uptick in significant claims right now, which is why we're pushing hard on the preventative side of things, so we can try and offset that. But when you have, that's what's driving this year, is those, and the types of claims that they're not going to fall off for a little while, and there's still significant costs that are going to be attributed to that. So it's not just trend.
Right,
Claims is
for
heavily-
this year's gonna be more of an anomaly from previous years too, because of the increase in cost.
And Steve, but back to that first page, kind of since you brought up the trend, in the calculation, there's about a 7% medical inflationary factor accounted for. If you look at obviously the claims report, if you want to go to the bottom, the top box, you can see the breakout of your trend, medical and pharmacy, right? So you're at almost 14% on medical, which is the bulk, right? Those don't get a 1-to-1 rating because pharmacy is a lot lower expense. So down in the bottom box, you're at 12% trend right now. And that formula is only calling for about 7%. So there's really, if you were a rigid actuary and going to look at it, you would say, well, we need to assume 14% trend in there. So there's really a 5% to 6% advantage that we're kind of giving the city and giving the employees and hoping that that trend is an anomaly. If you wanted to be really rigid about it, you'd say our trend's 12%, we need to assume 12 instead of 7. So there's some added benefit, in the formula in that regards to kind of help. So, my point in that is that formula isn't built around trying to stick it to the city or stick it to the employees and overly pad the fund. That formula is really kind of sculpted as aggressive as an actuary will approve it to be. Because remember, an actuary still has to sign off on.
Actuary's very tight with the money.
To the state, correct, they are, and we fight with them because they're overly conservative a lot of times, right? I mean, an actuary's dream world is you would never have a deficit ever, but we know that doesn't happen because that would be on the employee's back.
Yes.
If an actuary straight out ran their formula, you'd probably be looking at a 10, 12, 13% increase this year. So that's
very high reserves though.
Correct.
Yes.
But you also look and here's the thing, you've got 7 months left.
I'm not saying that would be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've got 7 months left. If you average 200,000 of deficit in the next 7 months, that's $1.4 million. So that will eat into kind of that reserve. So that's where we're looking and saying, look, a modest increase, 2.6%, trying to do that, knowing that, I was at a group 2 days ago in front of their board, and they had good years the last 2 years, and they did zeros, and they just, they're at a 24% increase. And the comment they made is, I wish we had done, 4% a year for the last 2 years, because now we'd maybe be looking at an 8 or a 9.
Right.
So we're trying to apply in some regards, even though not something rigid, saying we'll do a minimum of this each year. It's saying, look, we are having a bad year. Hopefully it's an anomaly, but we also need to account for the fact that what if this continues into next year? We could eat that surplus up extremely quick. So that a nominal 2.6% increase, I know any increase is not, appreciated. And I get that. I mean, I have insurance too, right? I work and our insurance goes up as well. For somebody in full family coverage, we're talking $8.83, pre-tax per pay. If you look at, I'll just say one more thing. Like if you look at, one of our entities the other day around here, the bulk of entities around here contribute 100% of single and 0% of dependent. As you guys know, the city contributes 68% towards family coverage. So looking at that data, the contribution and the amount that's being paid is kind of beyond competitive to what you would find in the market. I know it's an increase. I'm not dismissing the fact that food's going up, gas going up, all those things. I'm just trying to paint
No, I got you. So what we hear from our employees all the time is the increased cost of the premiums. I get complaints all the time from the ones that there's approximately between 350, I think it's right around 350 employee plus one, employee plus family totals that pay the bulk of the insurance. The city obviously covers all the rest.
Yep.
So and I have to tell the employees all the time, yes, there is a way to decrease that cost for you, but in order to do that, the employee onlys would have to take a share of the cost, which I said, there's 1,100 to 1,200 of those. they're not gonna approve that. I can't talk to, you know, the majority of our union or the other unions can't do the same thing and say, hey, can you take up the cost? It ain't gonna happen. So a lot of this extra burden on that portion is covered by employee plus one, employee plus family specific. Based on the numbers you gave us before and these numbers, it looks like we're trying to cover about $500,000 increase, right? Because last meeting was about $1 million that we had to cover. This year, this amount would be about $500,000. Our guys still do not want an increase. And they've gone through a lot over this last year as well for a lot of home expenses and family expenses, childcare expenses. Even though they get some back, they've had to do a lot of different things. I know all the other employees that were here in the city have done that, especially the ones that had to work from home and had to do other things with their children were at home. So there was a lot of expenses, and it adds on here. A couple of years ago, Jennifer.
Can I cut you off for one second?
Yes.
Let me, I just had a thought, and I want you to finish, but I just want to paint global picture
Sure.
of like that $8 for families. If you guys want to take a look, just so you know, the dental, the 2DH, the plans, the Sun Life was a 10% reduction. The Sigmas are 5% on the 2DHMOs. And the Cigna PPO, because the claims were a little bit higher, that one's based on claims, is a 1.7% reduction. The reason I tell you that, and then I want you to finish your thought, is, you know, I think everybody thinks about their paycheck. So if I have family coverage, it's going to go $8 a pay, but a little bit of that, my dental is actually going to reduce, so we're talking a little bit less. So with that, go on.
Yes, and I love it that the dental and such is reducing. I think that's great. That's a good thing. A couple of years ago, Jennifer, we were meeting over in the other conference room. It's a really different building. We were all discussing some increases and such. And one of the things we asked is if the city, it was I think a 4% increase we were looking at, something along those lines. And we asked, would the city be willing to cover that extra expenses? And one of the things you said is, you know what, don't do it right now. You specifically said, wait until it's a point where it would be needed and would be much better.
Right.
I think we're at that point, at this point in time. It's a smaller amount that we'd be asking for, $500,000 for the city to help cover, to keep this at a 0% increase. It would help the employees out across the city for any additional costs that they've approved. It's not that big of an increase we're asking them to cover. And I think that would also allow time to get all the numbers back in order and where they need to be.
So, and you're right, I did, and I guess my response to that is it, you know, and obviously we're in negotiations with police and fire, okay? But we're not in a situation where we're not providing increases, you know? We are providing significant increases. We also have the minimum wage that's overhaul that's coming in. That's a $12 million price tag on it that we're getting ready to implement. So in terms of the needing it, I feel like we're more than offsetting in the salary stuff. So, you know what I mean? When I think in terms of like, when do you need it, is when things are bad. And I don't think we're in a situation where things are bad. I mean, like, we had a conversation, is this even the time to buy down the 5%? And I wasn't, you know what I mean? Because a 5%, yes, it's an increase, but our salary increases are decent, okay? And more than offset it. So I wasn't sure, being full disclosure, because I'm incredibly transparent, that it was even necessary to buy down the 5%. But then, you know, when I take a step back and look at, you know what, we have been funding well, you know, you do need to, that's why we do self-insurance, so that we can have these things, is now the time to buy it down. And so I'm like, you know what, why we can, so why don't we buy it down? But when you look at collectively all the things that we have going on that are going directly to employees right now, I don't think this is the time to buy it to zero. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. I think you should really be thinking about your membership in this decision, because if we raid the 2.8 million this year,
When it's minor.
To get it from 2.6 down to 0, and next year inflation, which we're all reading about in the newspapers, medical inflation, next year all of a sudden with the fact that we're also having a bad year on top of that. We come back next year and we find out we've got a 10, 15, 20% increase. And we rated the 2.8 million. We don't have that available to help subsidize and offset. There's only so far council's going to be able to go in helping out with that. There is going to be a significant burden on the employees. That's going to be a big budget shock to everybody versus budgeting for 2.6 and saving some of that nest egg for a real rainy day, which we don't have currently with a 5% increase. Very frankly.
So I would like to make a motion.
Later, you want to say something before we get into the motions, everybody has an opportunity.
Okay.
Okay. I would like to make a motion that we postpone the vote on this so we can bring it back to our respective memberships to get with them and explain that there was a difference in our calculations, that there's not as much money in reserve funds as we thought there were, that we have increases more this year, and to talk to our memberships as well and get their input before, based on all these changes that we're actually getting through today. The changes in the big changes in the numbers that we were seeing and the reserve money that we thought we had in there that we don't. That needs to be brought into our membership, and also to the fact that our claims are increasing this year before we actually commit to the vote. We need to bring it back. So I motion that we postpone our vote until the next meeting so we can bring this back to our memberships for discussion.
I'm seconding that.
Any other discussion?
I just have a comment. How, in the interest of time, because this has to be, presented and approved, how much time do you think you need so that I can schedule the next meeting?
Just
3 weeks, maybe?
to get the numbers, go over the numbers and everything.
Yeah, it's probably 3 weeks or so.
When's the,
So,
when's
when's the next commission
hard
meeting?
date for you guys that it's gotta get to the commission and get approved? before it
Yes.
goes? I mean, we don't wanna push it back, obviously, 2 months from
Yeah.
now.
No, we're talking next month. And when's the
Beginning next
commission meeting?
month at that.
Yeah, but so, we meet August 3rd, so we won't have time for that. And keep in mind, everything has to be in, 2 weeks in advance of the meeting, so we have to have them,
Oh, yeah.
so that's where we run into it. So you would not make it for the August 3rd meeting because that deadline is the 19th, have it into council, so that it goes on the agenda.
So like the second week of August, we have the
The
meeting.
second meeting, we could do that, then it wouldn't go on August at all.
It would-
It
it would
wouldn't
for
get into
September
the
council.
September council.
Are you saying that the reason why you want to postpone is because you have to explain the 6 million that has
Yeah.
been spread throughout the
Yeah,
union?
so I don't,
Why
yes.
is there?
So I don't end up being thrown off the Memorial Causeway Bridge, because right now our memberships and is looking at skewed numbers, because our numbers that we were presented with were not correct, and our membership is looking at numbers that are way off of what they actually are. So we need to take that back to our memberships to explain, hey, this is the actual numbers. This is where we stand right now,
And the reason why,
and the reason
the
why.
reason why the numbers are different.
Yes, yes.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, we have to, we represent them. We need to have our respective unions' inputs and give them correct information so we can get our union's leadership's input on what they want us to do with this. We need that input in order to make this decision.
But it won't change anything.
Probably not, probably not,
But that's the fact. There's not $4 million someplace that's hiding somewhere.
and based on this, would I probably recommend going to this 2.6? Yes, I probably would, based on our changes in here. But I need to bring it to our representative, to our unions, to explain to them.
Well, and what I would ask that you also bring to the numbers is that, this is gonna sound a little bit harsh, but you can't just want the reduction when we have all these programs that would help on the bottom line, and then you don't participate. And I don't mean you, I mean the global you.
We know.
And,
Oh, yeah, of
you know what I
course.
mean? And so that's
Yeah.
frustrating on
Yeah.
our side of things, that it's like we get beat up on the increases, but yet the global you won't do anything about it. And so, and I can prove that in terms of the low participation that we have in this stuff. We're literally paying you to do the stuff that you should be doing, and you're still not doing it.
And
we've
been
been
addressing it
claims.
too. Yep.
So, you know, we have to have a partnership in this.
I
And
do
I
agree.
don't, and I don't feel we do. And so how do we change that? Because that's the only way it's gonna get, that's the only way that this is gonna get better, because we're gonna continue having these conversations and not make any progress. And so we're doing surveys. You guys have not completed the survey. You know what I mean? So like, we're trying to give you what you want so that we can impact these bottom lines, so we don't have to have this conversation, because the only way we're gonna change this is if we change our behavior. But yet, I'm not getting that. So I need your support in filling out the surveys, telling us what you want, and then actually participating in the programs that will help combat our bottom line.
We've been promoting them. We actually, on our end, we have been promoting them. We've been saying, look, you can get this money back. Go ahead, do this, get this money back. Go get a cancer screening, you get $75 back. You know, we've been promoting this as well, and the other programs as well. It's kind of like trying to make people wear masks.
I know, like I said, I know, and I get that, but it's, you know,
Yeah, we're trying.
You're gonna run out of sympathy.
Trust me, we understand it. We've been trying. We've been trying. It's not like we haven't been trying. Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, like, at least if we can show participation in these programs, and if you don't like the programs, then tell us what you want. You know, but like I said, it just can't be a one-way street like
Sure.
this. So, you know, because that's what it would take for, you know, all we do is have recommendations, you know, the decision makers of the council, but if you want us to get behind that, we need to, like I said, it's gotta be a two-way street.
And we
So
promote all the time what the
we need
city's
that
done. The health clinic, all this stuff, the
Yeah.
city, things that the city have done, going stuff in church. We do promote this. I get the questions all the time. I'm like, look, that's what they're doing. You know, this is here, this is helping, this is helping. You know, this is the problem right here. You're not gonna, the one thing that would reduce the cost down for employees is if employee plus one paid like 10%, and that ain't gonna happen.
Right.
I have no misconceptions that was gonna happen, so it's just the way this is. But we need to bring it back to them, I think,
Sure.
and give them the updated numbers and give them corrections on this, so we can bring you guys an accurate answer.
Okay, I wanted to bring up a point that's not about rates.
Let's finish this real quick. So we have a motion and a second. You want to, so we're waiting on that. Are we good? So vote on favor.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. So that's what we will do, is we will table it. Go ahead, Jill.
Typically, the city has a 4-week open enrollment period to renew benefits and whatnot. And what we would like to do is reduce that to 3 weeks rather than 4. The normal, if you will, and I don't like to use that term, but a typical open enrollment lasts 2 weeks. So we figure if we can reduce it to 3 without you know, any too much issue, then just throw that out there, and you can let us know what the consensus is at our next meeting too. At least that's what we'd like to do.
Okay, it probably wouldn't be a big deal unless we're on vacation.
Why would you like to reduce it?
Well, open enrollment, I mean, I think 3 weeks is enough time for somebody to make a decision on what they're gonna do with their benefits.
We have
mean,
very
it's-
low attendance.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to create.
No,
some
it's like
efficiencies.
a financial burden because of the extending it. Would it help out?
Yeah, no, so the reason we're asking to reduce it is because we spend a lot of staff time going to the different locations and people don't show up. And so it's like, rather than continue to staff something for 4 weeks without a lot of attendance, oftentimes without any attendance at all, we're gonna do it in 3 weeks just to have some efficiencies. It's a waste of our time. That doesn't seem like the employees need it. If the employees needed it, we would absolutely be there, but for several years now, most of our meetings are unattended. So.
Just a question that, do you think some of that comes into, like solid waste, you'd have a captive audience back when we had our monthly meetings, because they all have to be there and everything. But I remember when I first started in the city 20-some years ago, I was in survey, we had mandatory meetings.
Yeah. We've done away with a lot of
And
them.
that's what I'm wondering. I mean, this is important enough, because I think sometimes, and I'm just speaking for some of what goes on out there, and it's not a blanket statement or anything, but there are pockets of it where things come up, and we can even relate this down to votes that we've had and all kinds of things, where some supervisors just don't want to be bothered with it. They don't want to change their schedule. They do everything they can to kind of keep those employees working rather than letting them go to that meeting, letting them go to that vote, letting them. And I think if that's kind of on a little bit on your end to make sure that that opportunity isn't being pushed aside by.
You're saying mandatory slots for open enrollment?
Yeah, like everybody has to go to at least one.
Huh?
Well, I would just say.
Yeah, that for shift work and guys working midnight to come back and have to have mandatory, I don't know if there's applications on overtime that you're mandating someone to come in. On our side, I think it would be kind of difficult to make it mandatory to do.
Because I'm one of the ones with Leah doing the meetings, the mandatory meetings have a terrible outcome with staff because we have staff that are sleeping. We try to keep them as short as possible. We have staff that's disgruntled, like, I don't want to listen to you, I'm forced to be here. If I can talk to fire and police for when they want to be there, and I work with, Chief Slaughter and Chief Ellers, like, hey, I will make myself available. If they want to be here, I'll be here during the rotations and all that. And with solid waste, we get there an hour before they have to leave for the job site.
I know.
So, and we make it so we're working with all the department directors, and it's truly on the employee if they decide they don't want to use it.
So here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you getting a lot of questions called into you about open enrollment at the end of the time, or are you getting very few questions called into you?
So we put out an open enrollment video, and so that has been very helpful because a lot of people have their questions answered during those videos. We also have an open enrollment quick fact sheet that we have provided to employees. And so we have not gotten a lot of questions. And what's helped is, Major Dalton or Chief Ellers will put out a mandatory speak during this time, because if you come back after and say you didn't have the opportunity, that's on you, and those employees are spoken to because you're supposed to be checking your email daily. We're reaching out to you every which way. We're coming out to all shifts, multiple times during that open enrollment, and we're having nobody show up.
So it sounds to me like y'all are doing an excellent job on the online information going for an open enrollment. And open enrollment's done through the Benechecks, whatever we call it now. So there's not really that much of a need for extra meetings over here. So why can't we keep open enrollment like Shantae is going for 4 weeks, but reduce meetings down to maybe only 1 or 2?
I'm not going for it. I just asked
But
I understand why.
reduce maybe down to only 1 or 2 meetings during that time period. So allow for 4 weeks of open enrollment online.
So if we reduce the meetings, then we're not making ourselves available for all fire shifts. We're not making ourselves available for all police shifts. For the off days where solid waste, we'll have people off on like a Thursday. And on top of that, still managing employee relations. So like employee relations side of things doesn't go away. So like we still have to do the same amount of meetings.
Just over a shorter time frame.
Because we
Meetings
couldn't
that
do
aren't being
less,
attended.
we couldn't do less meetings
Correct,
because
nobody's coming to them.
Yes, because everyone's understanding it
You're not showing
online.
up to the site,
Yeah. So
Yeah, but
So-
during, what I do remember that we started doing more meetings every day because departments were saying that we weren't coming to meetings, we weren't there, we weren't available. So then when my staff was going out and having all these meetings, then nobody was showing up. So we responded to some feedback that we had gotten on a previous, benefit enrollment survey. And so, in my personal opinion, typically in other places, they don't even have meetings.
Right.
So I'm thinking 3 weeks is enough time.
Especially
And
during a year, we have no
Okay.
changes. You know what I mean? Like, there's
Yeah.
no plan changes.
Yeah.
And
I'm
it's-
okay with the 3 weeks. I'm not okay with you guys having meetings for no one attends.
I have another meeting I have to get to.
Okay.
Is there anything that anybody has any questions of me that I can answer before I go to my other meeting?
One question.
Who's got the brownie shirt?
What was the number?
It's Billy's birthday. Everybody provides a happy birthday to Billy.
in 1920.
Declared what?
Commitment as far as, membership and involvement. You know, if you have an idea what the numbers were percentage wise, what it fell off from 17, 18, 19, 20.
For like participation during open enrollment.
Yeah,
So I would-
it's some figure, of course.
So from the mandatory meetings to last year, I would say we actually had more participation last year than we have years prior. Ben Tech did start this admin assist, which was super beneficial if anybody did open enrollment last year. I could log in and I could go onto an employee's account and they could, you know, I don't have to have them sign in and do their passwords. So instead of sitting there with me for 20 minutes trying to figure out their login, they were there for less than 5 minutes. So we had a lot more participation with that. So overall, I would say the mandatory meetings, doing away with them, we had higher participation when we did away with the mandatory meetings, because you don't have people frustrated and like, all right, meeting's over, I don't want to stay and talk to these people, I just want to leave.
I don't think mandatory, but thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, guys. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you all.
So,
Yeah, I don't think
So
so.
also increase in everywhere.
But
it's a decrease.
I just hate to see you all having to call, do meetings and no one showing up. Even if you're able to do, say, hey, we've scheduled this block over here at MSB. If you know,
So we
at least
schedule-
if no one shows up, then you go back.
we do schedule the last 3 days, all day at the computer lab for people to show up for their stragglers. But, for example, if I only show up for shifts C and B, how many disgruntled A shift people will you have, even though they didn't show up last year? This year, they're gonna be like, well, HR doesn't care, they didn't take time to act.
Well, I don't want you, I wasn't saying mandatory because honestly, I fall in this camp a little bit. I fall a little bit in the camp, we're all supposed to be grown-ups.
Yes.
I mean, there is that little bit of a, but if it's truly something that you want to make sure you touch as
Yeah.
many people as
Right
possible,
now.
I think it's much more possible that day, as you had in
Time for that back.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to make sure you touch, that was the only reason I brought it up. But I do fall in the camp of, you have a personal responsibility, this is.
I think with, between Launchpad, between emails, between postcards, if an employee is not paying attention to all of those resources, then at that point, it's like, hey, you're not following the standards, because the standards is to constantly be checking your email. You're an adult, that's not on me.
No,
So-
and I think for where we face, maybe more than fire and police, our challenge in that with our people is the ones that do work on the back of a garbage truck or run a mower all day or do what, things like that. They don't want to hang out.
Correct.
They don't want to do something for work after they, you know, they're ready to go crash at home. I mean, that's just, because they work hard out there, not that you guys don't,
No,
but
there's
but you know what I'm saying,
There's no
so.
penalty to not, there's no penalty if you don't show up. If there was a penalty for it, as if you would lose a benefit, people would show up for it. But if it's gonna be the same thing I had last year, if I'm single,
Yes.
why would I show up if nothing's gonna change?
Correct, and that's what
Well,
Gina
yeah,
said.
that's
Yeah.
If
true.
there's no
It's
real
the same.
changes, there's no reason that open enrollment needs to be on.
job online. That's what it is. You guys done a good job getting it all out online. And there's less of a need for people to, we're in a modern age. Most of the people coming on the department and making, especially ones that are just starting in this city over here, they've got 10 times more computer knowledge and stuff than I do. So they know how to look this stuff up online and figure it out.
Unless I was mistaken, just for my FYI. Am I understanding that the more employees are using less incentives?
More employees are using less
Less
incentives.
incentives, yes.
Yeah, they're not using all the incentives that we have. So we have the Motivate Me, which we worked hard to get the life scans, because that was one thing that was put in the surveys. Again, we're listening to surveys. So I know that a lot of fire and police have come to me saying, why am I gonna waste my time when we have the life scan? So now we do have the life scan. I don't know, Sean, if you've seen an increase in fire and police doing Motivate Me?
I'd have to get a custom report to see
Well,
that.
I stand all we're required to.
Yes, exactly, but we have the Motivate Me, which is an incentive program, so like the physicals and stuff, instead of having to do a physical, you use your life scan and you get a free $50 gift card.
The gateway to it used to be, no matter what, whether you did a life scan or not, you had to go to the health clinic and get a gateway exam in order to get, receive
But now
money.
life scan counts.
And now the life scan counts as your
And you
gateway.
don't have to just use the employee health center, you can go to your own primary care as well.
Yes.
So that
And the
was
forms
something,
are online to go ahead and fill it out.
Yeah.
Okay, my question would be, we're giving away more cannabis and less participation. Why?
Well, that's a darn good question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
people don't want to be bothered.
Like, why people aren't doing it?
Yeah.
It could be a lack of knowledge that it's even out there. It could be not on, we don't read the emails. Some people just don't. We get bombarded by emails.
Well, and large, some of our employees don't have email access. You can send emails until you're.
Yeah,
blue in the face.
let me hit a couple of things on kind of the why, because I think I understand in some ways what you're asking. You know, the first thing is, the nice thing about the Motivate Me type program is it doesn't really cost any, so if nobody does it, it doesn't really cost anything. So we're not adding a cost burden in having that program. And the benefit of it, obviously, is if we can get people in to get those screenings, you know, we hopefully can keep you off that large claim list. I mean, I don't know if you guys look, but there's $1 million claim rate. You know, if we can stop those from happening, you know, it makes a big impact in that regard. So that's really, but you know, to your point, if no one does it, it doesn't really cost the city. There's not a burden on doing that program. So that's what we tried to look for. And just because it's the last thing on the agenda, I want to add. Oh, go ahead.
So right now, so participation in Motivate Me is up about 43% over last year.
Excellent.
Can you tell,
Excellent.
can you tell my department who's been using it?
No, well, I can't
We-
bring it.
can we
I see
find that
total,
out?
I can see the total numbers, but I will say, I will say this though,
Yeah, I
so
wonder if that's
I will say this though, so last year towards the end of the fourth quarter, we did this departmental challenge type of thing, a dinner for your department or whatnot. So I started looking at departments, going through the list of people, just to get a jump on it, especially 2 areas, it's a lot. And there's a fair, and I didn't complete it yet, but there are a fair number of police and fire that have participated. So relative to percentage, I don't know what that is, but in terms of, from what I think, more, because last year even participation was pretty reasonable.
Because every time you go to life scan, that's $50.
Well, life scan, so they,
It's the gateway.
yeah, so they sign off on that, and they can utilize that now as
You
their,
can use it for
two different things, yeah, so it's cool now because.
Total of 100.
Yeah, because it made sense if you had to go and do a physical. The reason that was the case is because that rolled up through the claims process.
Because
So now it's,
if it's mandated that every single sworn officer has to do it, I wonder how many are actually utilizing it just because they have no idea that it's even available. So if you have us having to do it, which you guys want us to do, you want us to go and get these screenings, right? We are doing it because we're mandated to do it. Now, how much of us are actually getting the return back from that Motivate Me? It could be a lack of actual knowledge that's even there because we have to do it. So why not just get the money if it's there?
Yeah,
right,
especially if
exactly.
it's like a
That's exactly right.
$300
Yeah.
and you can get the gift card in like Amazon to sporting goods, Delta Airlines.
I got
I
one.
want to know how many police officers actually have been using it.
I'll have Sean take a look at it.
I think that's kind of, I don't know if it's actually fine and not, I
They have
looked at
Dunkin'
some of that
Donuts
stuff,
gift
and I-
cards too for you guys.
But I will say, I think, I was like, but I just started looking at some of this.
I wasn't going there.
There's a cap of
And
200.
I was pretty happy because I saw a lot of fire and I saw a lot of police. I don't know how it looks compared to
It's
like
much
last
easier
year,
now than it was.
But I thought, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yes.
So I don't know what the numbers are.
That was huge for us, getting it like that.
I will say on our end,
Are you promoting
the lack of the monthly department meetings, in my mind, probably dropped
No,
our
I'm
CWA
going
department.
yeah.
So maybe even higher,
So-
because a lot of our, like, I just look at like the
And I
parks
tell
and
that
Rec
myself.
guys, the solid waste guys that don't have computers in front of them. I have a computer in front of me all day, so I see all the emails.
We mentioned it at union meetings
Guys?
and stuff too.
Yes, come back to you.
We need to get back on the meeting agenda so that we can discuss Amada, which is another new program that we're gonna use, and motivate a little bit more about Motivate Me.
Yeah, and I think since we're gonna have another meeting, we'll just hit on the Omada today. And so Omada is a program that you all will see for next year. Omada is kind of classified as a diabetes prevention program, but it's actually a little bit broader in that regard. But basically, if you meet, there's a set of criteria. So if you have, a BMI that's overweight, essentially, and you have one other condition, it could be high blood pressure, high triglycerides, high blood sugar. It's not meant for somebody that is already in a diabetic state. It is really a program designed around nutrition and coaching to help keep you from ever getting to that state.
Diabetic prevention program, basically.
Basically, yes.
When you say I'm not in a diabetic state, and I had this discussion with doctors back and forth, when they claim you're pre-diabetic.
So
There's really no such thing as pre-diabetic.
So in that regard, I won't argue with the doctors, but this is really targeted to people that, at least based on that criteria, I think the numbers Chris might know. I think if your blood sugar is 100 to 110, they quote unquote call that pre-diabetic, and then 110 and over is. So basically, if you're already in a situation where you are taking insulin, taking a medicine to reduce your blood sugar, it's not a program targeted for those individuals. It's really somebody that's maybe been flagged as, hey, you're in that pre-risk, but you don't even necessarily have to have the blood sugar issue, right? If you have, if your weight's over and you have other markers, I think just one other marker and there's a list. This program, it uses a coaching methodology, so they send you a digital scale. When you step on that scale, your coach sees your numbers. They work with you on diet, exercise, all those things. Completely voluntary, so you don't have to do it. If somebody has to opt in. A couple of people from HR are doing a demo of it right now, just getting some exposure to the program. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Once you said body mass index, BMIs, I work out. And I'm pretty sure this officer right here works out himself.
No,
I can't tell though, but he got the best. Nah, I'm considered overweight because of me working out. So, and the reason why I'm considered because I got muscle on me. I'm not fat, So
yeah.
Those numbers are going to be completely accurate. You understand what I'm saying? Because I live a healthy lifestyle. I eat clean. I work out regularly. My job entails pretty much a glorified dish digger. So I'm digging, shoveling all day, just about normally. So my point is, those numbers aren't going to be too accurate. You understand what I'm saying?
Who's using it?
I completely understand what you're saying.
Specialists.
Well, first off, let me take it step, because I understand,
Because I'm considered obese because of
correct, and this
my weight.
has nothing to do with whether or not somebody's considered obese, right? There's certain markers that qualify someone for the program. That is one of the potential markers. Just because somebody has a BMI of 26 doesn't mean they have anything wrong with them healthy, and that's not what this is trying to say. And it's not saying because you have a BMI of 26, you have to go into this program, because one, it's completely voluntary, right? We're not forcing anybody into anything. We're not, this is a voluntary program. If you are, at risk and you want help and you want to engage in this program and you meet the criteria, you can engage in the program. Nobody has to do anything in that regard. What the program is really designed around is trying to provide somebody an opportunity for kind of in-person, but virtual, one-on-one coaching to say, look, maybe you have a risk, right? Your blood pressure is high. Maybe that's diet related that's causing it, so you work with that coach. If you don't want to do the program, you don't have to. And we're not saying because somebody has a BMI that's 1 point or 2 points over, that we think they're unhealthy or anything like that. It's just there's a list of this qualifies that qualifies someone to voluntarily enroll in the program if they want. So if you are the marathon runner that has nothing wrong with you, you run every day, you know, you don't have high blood pressure, high triglycerides or anything, you don't qualify to participate in that program. So this is just another offering that's being made available. So people come all the time and say, hey, I'm struggling with my weight, but I don't know who to go to. So this is just an option for coaching. What we really like about the program overall is the OMADA, it comes through as a preventative claim to the city, only if that coach helps that person achieve success. So let's say that, you're overweight and you have all these high markers and you go on this coaching program and you get worse, the city doesn't get charged $1, right? So there's no cost to the city. So it's really a performance-based, comes through as claims, completely free to the employee. So what we're trying to do is, if you look at the global landscape, and Chris could kind of jump in here, right? 10, 15 years ago, we had these kind of programs where we said, hey, if you're overweight, do this program. And we took this blanket approach, right? Kind of with everybody. So what like an OMADA is trying to do is trying to be for that percentage of the population that wants that help, just another tool for them to engage. It's not going to be for everybody, but it could be for somebody. If we can take somebody that's in a state of not taking a medication for diabetes, but in a year is going to be there, and we can keep them from getting there, that's going to save the plan probably $20,000 a year when you look at the cost of those diabetes meds, and it's only going up. So that's what the program's designed around, completely voluntary. The VMI discussion is just one of about, Chris, I think like 9 or 10 different things that could make you eligible to participate.
The reason why I brought that up because I went to the city clinic and I get physicals every year from the city clinic.
Yep.
Because it's free, it's available. I get blood work done through them too because it's free and it's available. And they try telling me, BMIs, this and that. I'm a pescatarian. I eat fish, eggs. I'm pretty much a vegetarian that eats eggs and fish. So, and I changed my lifestyle because of that to lower certain things. And they offered me something similar to that, saying to go see a nutritionist or whatnot. Well, I know what I need to eat. I've done that. My question is does the city get, I guess, for sure sportsmen, does the city get a kickback for everyone that does well?
They get, if you do well, they pay for it, right? It's a cost.
Yeah, the city actually, no, the city doesn't, no.
They don't get a kickback then.
No.
It's
No,
probably
yeah.
but the point is to stop people, like you said, from having to take expensive medicines, to have expensive procedures, to have, it's all, I think, and you guys can jump in if I'm explaining it wrong, but I think the idea of all these programs that are going on, Motivate Me, this OMADA, these different programs, is to stop future expenses.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Right, so it's just a whole thing
Prevention
now.
versus cure.
Exactly, and I think the big thing with all these programs, all we can do is create programs that hopefully can create awareness, right? And I always say, and I'll use this as an example, right? We do a wellness fair, and the guy that, comes in with his track shoes on and is like, hey, I want my incentive. The reality is that's great because we want to, but that's not, the guy that goes to the doctor every 3 months for his checkup and gets his life, that's not really what we're trying to target, because that person's, even if they're, on meds or something, they're maintaining. What we're really worried about and what causes the big claims are the ones that get caught by surprise, right? Exactly. The person that hasn't gone to the doctor for 10 years and has no idea what their blood sugar is. And, trust me, I understand going to the doctor and they tell you, oh, you're overweight. You're like, wait a minute, and you're probably looking at them like, I'm in better shape than you, and I understand and that, but that's not, we're trying to get that person that doesn't ever go, that doesn't get that cancer screening.
So you get a scale and a digital coach. in person, like telephone?
It's a person coach. It's actually live. Like if you can text them, but if you text them at 2 a.m, they're asleep. Like it's not a whole
Well, my picture at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, no, so, but, yeah,
So
no,
when we step on your scale at 2 o'clock in the morning.
yeah, and you know, if, you know, you lost weight, and then let's say you go back up and they see that in the scale, they might say, hey, you know, Sean, what'd you do different last week? And you're like, oh gosh, you know, I was on the night shift and I had no choice but to eat from a drive-through or whatever, you know. The point is to get you to help understand what causes that.
Yes.
Right? It's not to, you know, and then that coach obviously may say, hey, have you ever thought of trying this? Or it might be, you know, hey, you know, what are you eating? Are you eating a lot more processed foods than that? So it's designed to give people information and help them make better decisions. That's all we're trying to do. People that have done the program, you know, really like it. And candidly, the people that don't like it probably aren't even going to start it. So it's not, you know, the nice thing is it doesn't cost the city anything now. And what we're looking at, we just have to hammer a couple of things out with Cigna is, can we also add a motivate me value to that? So, you know, a different way to get to your maximum incentive for it.
Did they raise the maximum?
Right now, we didn't budget to raise the maximum you're talking about the 200 overall. Yeah, right now, we haven't looked at that just because a lot of people aren't even getting the 200.
Well, that's a lot of motivation for a lot of the low-line employees to cash in their pocket.
But if 200 isn't motivation, I don't know that 200.
So yeah, so let me throw it back to you guys as a group then. If $200 isn't enough, what's the number that motivates me?
Nowadays,
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think that there is one.
nowadays it's gotta be high, which the city's not gonna go for, honestly. But it's,
The comment was kind of made, like maybe 200 isn't enough. So I guess the question is, what is enough? I'm not saying that city's
There's one thing
That's something that we could ask for.
That's the one where
You think you
the survey says it
Now,
they can share all your information of all these.
That motivated you to now.
Let me tell you one thing. Let me tell you what cities do that get really high participation.
Oh, sure, yeah, no, of course.
What do they do?
So that,
Hang on.
But to that point, let me tell you, cities that get really high participation, what they do is they say something along the lines of, I was at a city last night, right? They have a clinic similar to you guys. If you get your annual health assessment at the clinic, single coverage is $0. If you don't, single coverage is $128 a month. And they get 99.5% participation.
yeah.
Right? So, you know, if you wanted to be more drastic and say we really want to get people, and that's how you would do it, more than probably, even if you bump motivate me up to $500, you're probably still not going to see that much of an incremental increase. What you're going to see is the people that are already doing it earning $500 instead of $200.
Let's give it a try.
Are you going to protect me when they come with the pitchforks?
So I think I know the answer to this question, but employee plus one, employee family, did the plus one and the family get just motivate you?
No, it's
Employee,
just-
just employee.
Unless the wife is pregnant, and then there's some stuff.
Well, that's
That's
not
a
part of it.
separate-
That's not part of
That's
it.
a separate
Yes.
incentive.
Yes.
That's a pregnancy incentive.
It's like, I was just talking to him, I do the health assessments for the clinic. I never got paid for it.
Because you
Did you
know
go
about
onto
it.
my Cigna
You have to
to
redeem
your
it.
incentive?
You have to-
Yeah, you have to redeem
Because you have
it.
to choose a gift
so I
card you
didn't
want.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's what I'm
That's all I
saying,
know.
it's the education.
It's
So
the
the emails go out every week at our wellness email, and we also have all the wellness, we have a wellness website on our intranet. I mean, the information is there. If you have questions about redeeming, you can call HR, you can talk to Chris, but when you complete a screening, you have to go onto my Cigna, under the wellness page, and then you'll see how much you've got, and you can pick your gift card, and that's how you redeem.
I put
They
together
send it directly to your house.
if you go on Launchpad, I put together several on-demand videos because I would get a lot of questions. So if you go on Launchpad and you can click on it, it will show you.
Just recently, I'll be able to access emails again because I was having issues with logging on for a while. So
And I have another idea, I think it would help in some departments, because we just started using kind of some QR technology. What I'm wondering, Chris, if you already have the videos, is maybe we could create a poster with, it says, hey, go do this, and also maybe a QR code that would link to that. That seems to be kind of the way that, that way,
Right, yeah.
I know you guys have people that probably don't look at email very much, but
We also
maybe.
have wellness champions.
I mean, I
There should
would
be a
say,
representative from each department on the wellness champion. What's your department?
I'm on utilities.
Do we have anybody?
We do a lot.
Who's on our
Barry Robinson is.
Yeah, he's a CAT, but you have to understand not all of my.
No, you. And I've
Not all
talked to
my guys
Barry.
have access to.
Yeah.
They don't have time
We've
to
talked about it.
access regularly to the computers to
I
access.
like the poster idea though.
I like the poster, I think
We can
we
stick on
Then
the
you
board.
post it, it's coming.
Like even
Yeah,
just
that'd
to
be a
get
great idea.
anything for our guys in solid waste, they'll stick it right on the door.
Okay.
And then, because they all go in and out of it every day, and it's right here.
That
Because they don't have the
Posters
email, you know what I
Posted
mean?
last year. So I'm just gonna say, for those that didn't have email, not with a QR code. Oh, okay, so that's why I
You gotta put it right by the time clocks too.
It was right by the time clock.
I'll say it for everybody.
I was in the bathroom stall,
Believe
it
it or
was
not,
by
those
the
were
time clock.
So,
The QR code.
so yeah, that's
You
the
know,
same.
it sounds
That's the
funny.
technology we have now that I'll see if we can link to Chris's stuff.
So we already talked about motivate me already, right?
Yeah, that was.
Okay, that's already, we discussed that.
Because we
Open discussion, I'm pretty sure we discussed
so much
everything.
fun reading that. Seeing the bad on the side and seeing that.
I agree. So,
So let me, before we close, let me ask one question, see if we can take it after, but I just want to make sure that you have, or everybody for your departments, if there's any additional information that you need that's not in the packet, just make sure you let us know specifically what that is. So that we, if you need documents or whatever, that we can put that together for you. So, and if you guys want to follow up, to an email with Jill, or if, you say, yeah, it's already in the packet or whatever it is, just make sure, let us know so that we can, get back together.
I was all ready to throw axes all across this room, and Jay kind of patted all my axes.
One question about the difference in the reserve fund that we were saying, I think Sean, you and Jennifer were saying, we go back and tell our respective departments, members, why? Did we come up with a definite why there is a discrepancy?
No.
Yeah,
We know the numbers. No, we gotta get the
We
numbers
did.
still.
We came up
No,
with why.
the why, the
It's-
why was, the system that populates our claims, which basically comes out of Bentec, that those individuals that have dual family, the 2 city employees, they were showing twice.
So it could have been 30 couples, but it was showing 60 employees. And really, it would only be 30 claims of funding. Let's say each couple, their monthly cost was $500, just throwing out a number. Then it was really showing that the city was taking in $1,000 instead of $500, and that was showing on the total funding.
And that was just in the Gearing Group's database.
So
It was our
Yeah,
information, our payroll information being fed to their database was causing their database to be incorrect. So therefore, Sean's number of the cumulative savings was overstated because of that error. It didn't affect any of the city's numbers. The city's numbers were going in correctly from the payroll system into the general ledger, and that's what's flushed out now, is we've got this cumulative difference that's occurred because of that $80,000 a month that was being overstated
Right.
in their numbers.
And just,
It was probably driven because we had to have that count for Motivate Me because we did make, even though regular spouses are not eligible for Motivate Me, dual spouses are. So
That would make
that's
sense why the change was
probably
made.
what generated, because they had to be accounted for different. So we could share the data with Cigna, so those, 30 to 40 dual spouses, because they were employees, could be eligible to participate in Motivate.
So basically, you got to prove to our union that that $4 million never existed, and that $4 million weren't used in prior calculations for any raises towards our premiums. Were these numbers that we have, were they used?
if anything, the calculations would have been used to reduce the amount that were our premium raised.
But I think what you're saying is,
Yeah, we've done that was a direct mistake.
yeah, so are you kind of saying, was it also assumed to assume a higher cost, is that what you're saying?
It was assumed that our funding was higher than it actually was. based on-
Correct, but also the way the formula works, it goes based off the employee count. So it also assumed, if it was $10,000 in claims per employee per year, it assumed those extra 30 people
Right,
also had those claims,
Which didn't exist.
which didn't exist. So
Right.
they ultimately were a
So for
wash,
the
and the
categories.
percentage increases that were applied were appropriate the whole time.
But
Does
just so
that
I
answer your
It was
question?
constant. It stayed, it
So
got,
just so I have
It
my
was,
numbers
you
right
took
here. This
Well,
started right around 2017, it continued on to
All right,
now.
well, let's
where it
wrap
was
it up.
2017
What
before.
will you, I think, is Sean provided initially what he showed year by year. That caused us to say, whoa, time out, that's not.
Okay.
City's number.
Yes.
I mean, it's protection gap skill.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Motion second.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
That would be awesome. That was.
It's always down.
I can wrap it up, guys. Wrap